My name is Aurora, and at 30 years old, I found myself in a life that felt like a never-ending loop. My dad passed away a few years ago, leaving my mom and me to fend for ourselves. Or at least, that was how it felt. I didn't have much of a choice when it came to staying with her. She was all I had left, and I couldn't bring myself to leave her alone in the house. Despite how draining it was, I stayed. In the beginning, after Dad died, I told myself it was just temporary. I would take care of her for a while, help her get back on her feet, and then I would go. But time passed, and the truth was, I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave her in the state she was in. She had been devastated by Dad's death, barely eating, barely sleeping. I felt this overwhelming responsibility to be there for her, especially as the eldest daughter. But what I didn't realize was how toxic the situation had become. I was constantly giving, constantly doing everything I could to support her, but nothing was ever enough. Every time I thought I was making progress, she found a way to remind me that I wasn't enough. I had worked hard to get to where I was in life. I graduated from college with a decent degree, found a steady job, and though I lived with my mom, I paid the bills, covered the mortgage on the house, and made sure we had everything we needed. But none of that ever seemed to matter to her. My younger sister, Zara, had already married and moved out long ago. She had this perfect life, or at least, that's how it looked on the outside. She was beautiful, fashionable, charismatic, everything that I wasn't. I was always the serious one, the one who stayed home and worked hard, but never got the recognition for it. While Zara effortlessly breezed through life with her charm, I was stuck in the shadows, struggling to please a mother who never seemed to notice me. Mom would never say it outright, but it was clear to me that Zara was her favorite. She had always been the golden child, and I had always been the one in the background, doing everything to hold things together. It wasn't just in small moments either. It was every single day. Zara was the one Mom talked about the most. "Zara's so pretty," she'd say. "Zara's so fun. Zara always knows how to make people laugh." Meanwhile, I was the one who stayed home, worked hard, kept the house in order. Yet, when I'd bring it up, all Mom would say was, "Why are you so serious all the time?" Or, "I wish I were living with Zara instead of you." It was like my presence didn't even matter, but I stayed. I stayed because I didn't know what else to do. After Zara married and moved out, I thought maybe I'd finally get some of Mom's attention, but I was wrong. With Zara gone, I was left as the target for her disappointment. It wasn't just that I didn't get the praise I thought I deserved, it was that I was constantly compared to Zara. "Why can't you be more like her?" she would say. "You're nothing like your sister." I remember one day I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped. I had been paying the mortgage, buying groceries, covering utilities, doing everything I could to make sure the house ran smoothly. I turned to her and said, "Mom, I know you think Zara's great, but you don't need to put me down like this. I'm doing everything I can to take care of you." Instead of calming down, she exploded. "If you were half as good as Zara, I wouldn't have to deal with you every day. At least she knows how to make me proud." Those words hit me harder than I could have ever expected. They echoed in my mind for days, replaying over and over again. I felt like I was drowning in her rejection. No matter how hard I tried, I would always come second to Zara. But it wasn't just emotional neglect. It was everything. Everything I did for the house was dismissed. Everything I worked for was erased by her constant comparison. And yet, I still stayed, still gave everything I could. Because I had promised myself that I would take care of her, for Dad's sake, for my family's sake. But there was only so much I could take. The cracks in our relationship were starting to show, and I couldn't pretend that everything was fine anymore. Things began to shift one evening when Zara called. It wasn't the first time she'd called for help. After all, Zara had always been good at asking for things, always seemed to have some crisis on hand. But this time, it felt different. I didn't know why, but it did. She told me that she and her husband, Mark, were struggling. Mark had lost his job and they couldn't afford their rent anymore. Zara was in tears on the phone. "Mom, I don't know what else to do. Can we stay with you for a while?" she asked, her voice shaky with desperation. Mom's response was immediate. Of course you can stay here. My precious Zara, you can stay as long as you need." I stood frozen, Listening to their exchange, my heart sank as I realized what was happening. It didn't even occur to my mom to consult me first. The moment Zara needed something, I was pushed aside, again. But it wasn't just the fact that they were moving in that hurt. It was how it was all handled, like I didn't matter, like I wasn't even there. I had been the one holding everything together, and yet, it felt like I was nothing to them. Before I could speak up, my mom turned to me, a smile plastered on her face, and said, "Zara and her family are moving in. We need to make room for them." I was stunned. "Wait, Mom, I live here too. You can't just decide without even asking me." She looked at me, her expression blank. "So what? This house is in my name. You don't like it, you can leave." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice trembling. "Oh, I'm serious," she replied, her tone cold. "If you don't like it, then maybe it's time for you to leave." I couldn't breathe. Her words were like knives, cutting deep into a place I hadn't even realized was vulnerable. It wasn't just that she was kicking me out. It was that she was willing to do it without hesitation, without any remorse. "You've been nothing but a stand-in for Zara," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "Now that she's back, I have no use for you." I stood there, my mind racing, my heart shattering. How could she say that? How could she just throw me away like that after everything I had done? After everything I had given? At that moment, I knew things would never be the same. My family had always been dysfunctional, but this was the breaking point. I was done. I wasn't going to take this anymore. I had given them everything, and now I was going to take control of my life. I wasn't going to wait around for their approval or love that would never come. I was done. But little did I know, this was just the beginning. The real conflict was only about to unfold. It didn't take long for the reality of the situation to set in. My mom's decision to let Zara and her family move in without even consulting me hit harder than I anticipated. But what really pushed me over the edge was how seamlessly my mom and Zara slipped back into their routine of taking advantage of me, as if nothing had changed. When Zara and her husband Mark arrived with their kids, it was like I had never existed in the house. My room was quickly turned into a playroom for the kids, my personal space reduced to nothing more than an afterthought. At first, I tried to keep my distance, retreating into my work and spending more time at the office, but the situation was inescapable. It was around the third day after they moved in that my mom turned to me with a concerned look. "Aurora," she said, her voice dripping with a forced sweetness I knew all too well. "I know you're working hard, but we could really use some extra help with the house now that there are more people here. Could you start contributing more? Maybe pick up some extra groceries?" My stomach twisted. I had been paying for the groceries, the utilities, and even the mortgage for months. I had been supporting us both, and yet here she was, acting like I wasn't already doing enough. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm already paying for everything. I've been covering the bills and the mortgage. I've been paying for groceries, utilities, everything." She looked at me, her face blank for a moment before she sighed. "I know, but Zara and Mark are struggling right now. Can't you just help a little more? We're a family after all." It was as if she was talking to me like I was the one who wasn't pulling my weight, like Zara and Mark's financial ruin was somehow my problem. It wasn't that I didn't want to help them out, but I had been giving everything I had for years. I was exhausted, emotionally and financially, and it felt like nothing I did was ever appreciated. I swallowed my frustration and nodded, though the tightness in my chest refused to loosen. "I'll get the groceries," I muttered, turning away to avoid any more conversation. The next few days passed in a haze of resentment. Zara made herself at home, acting as if the house was hers, while Mark spent most of his time on the couch, scrolling through his phone or playing with the kids. My mom busied herself with errands and appointments, rarely acknowledging the strain I was under. But things didn't stop there. One evening, I came home to find a pile of bills on the kitchen counter. The mortgage payment, utilities, credit card bills, everything. But there was a new bill mixed in, a large sum for car repairs. I raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to the bill. Zara, sitting at the table with a glass of wine, looked up from her phone and gave me an innocent smile. Oh, that's Mark's car. It broke down a few days ago. We didn't have the money to fix it, so we just used the house funds. I blinked. What do you mean, house funds? This isn't your house. You can't just use my money to fix your car. Mom, overhearing the conversation, stepped in. Aurora, it's not that big of a deal. Zara and Mark are struggling, and I thought it would be okay if we helped them out. Help them out? I repeated, my voice rising. Help them out. I'm already paying for everything. I'm covering all the bills here, and now you want me to pay for their car repairs too? My mom's expression turned cold, as if she was done listening to me. You have a good job, Aurora. You're fine. You can afford it. Can I? I snapped, incredulity coloring my voice. I'm paying for everything, every single thing, and yet it's never enough for you. Zara leaned back in her chair and let out an exaggerated sigh. Aurora, you're being dramatic. We're just asking for a little help. I didn't know it would make you so upset. We're family, after all. Family. That word again. But it wasn't family that I was dealing with. It was a manipulative, selfish group of people who had taken everything from me, and now they were going for more. The argument ended in silence. I retreated to my room, my heart pounding with frustration. How had things gotten this far? How had I let myself be so completely taken advantage of? The next day, I found another surprise waiting for me. My mom had sent me a text asking if I could cover a few more bills that month. Apparently, their credit card had maxed out, and they needed money for groceries. Again, I felt my blood boil. I had been doing this for months, but now they were demanding even more. The final straw came a week later, when I discovered that Zara had been secretly using my credit card to purchase groceries and other household items. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe I had forgotten a charge or something. But when I checked the receipts, I saw dozens of transactions for things I never bought. Expensive items, luxury brands, things I couldn't afford. When I confronted Zara, she acted like it was no big deal. Oh, I just used your card for groceries, she said casually. You're always so busy? I thought it would be easier if I just took care of it. I stared at her, incredulous. You can't just take my card without asking. You can't use my money like this. Zara shrugged. You have plenty of money. It's not a big deal. I wanted to scream. This isn't about money. It's about respect. You don't get to just take from me without asking. I'm not your personal bank. But Zara just smiled, that same smug smile she had always worn, and walked away, leaving me standing there, seething with anger and disbelief. It was clear now. I wasn't just living in a house with my family. I was living in a house where I was the only one doing anything, the only one contributing. And the more I gave, the more they took. I realized I had two choices. Keep giving in and letting them walk all over me, or take a stand and take control of my life. I was tired of being the silent, submissive daughter who only existed to please them. I was done. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't live like this anymore. They had taken everything I had, and now it was time to take something back. I just had to figure out how. I had always thought that family was supposed to be a place where you could find unconditional love and support. I had spent so many years believing that, despite all the pain, despite all the neglect and criticism, there would always be a bond between us, something that would keep me tethered to them. But with every day that passed, I could feel that bond fraying. The more I gave, the more they took. They weren't just taking my money, they were taking my dignity, my time, and my energy. And with every demand, every passing moment of disregard, the resentment I felt grew, but I couldn't bring myself to confront them. Not yet. I didn't know how. I was still so trapped in the cycle of trying to please them, trying to make them love me the way they loved Zara. But the day came when I finally saw just how far they were willing to go, how far they had already gone, when I walked into the living room to find my mom and Zara having a whispered conversation. When they saw me, they immediately stopped talking, and Zara quickly grabbed her purse. "Mom, I'll be right back. I'm just going out for a bit," she said, her voice overly bright, almost too casual. But the look they shared was enough to make my heart skip a beat. There was something about the way they both glanced at each other, something secret, something that didn't sit right with me. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though a cold sense of dread was creeping up my spine. "Oh, just out to run some errands," my mom said, a little too quickly, her eyes darting away from mine. "Nothing you need to worry about." I didn't know why, but in that moment, something in me snapped. I had been playing along for so long, pretending that I was okay with everything, pretending that I could just keep on giving. But this felt different. I could feel the betrayal in the air, thick and suffocating. I had to know what they were up to. "I'm coming with you," I said suddenly, before I could stop myself. "I'll get my jacket." Zara looked startled, but before she could protest, I had already turned and walked to my room, grabbing my coat. I could hear them murmuring to each other in the next room, their voices low, too low to make out the words, but the tone was enough to make my heart race. It was clear now that they were hiding something from me, something important. When I came back, they had already left the house, the front door clicking shut behind them. A sinking feeling lodged in my stomach. I didn't know where they were going, but I was about to find out. I grabbed my keys and followed them, keeping a distance so they wouldn't notice me. They drove for nearly an hour, heading out of the neighborhood and toward the outskirts of town. I followed them to a small, nondescript building. It looked like a warehouse of some kind, and as I watched, I saw my mom and Zara exchange an odd glance before walking inside. I stayed in my car, my mind racing with possibilities. What were they doing here? Why hadn't they told me? I watched for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. They went in, stayed for a while, then left. But they were carrying a large envelope. My mind spun with questions. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was inside that envelope. The next day, I waited until I knew they were out of the house. Then I went straight for my mom's bedroom. I found the envelope in the drawer just as I suspected. My heart pounded as I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside were documents, papers that made my blood run cold. The first sheet was a legal document, an eviction notice, dated just a week before. It was addressed to me. I stared at the paper in disbelief. They had been planning this all along. They had known what they were doing when they kicked me out. But it wasn't just the eviction notice. It was the bank statement that followed, showing the depletion of my savings. My heart clenched as I read the numbers. All the money I had saved up over the years, the money I had earned and carefully budgeted, was gone. Every last penny had been transferred out, taken without my knowledge, used for their own expenses. But there was more. The final document was a loan agreement between my mom and Zara, a personal loan, and the amount was enormous. They had used my money to fund Zara's debts that Zara had accumulated due to her constant lifestyle of excess. They had drained everything I'd worked for to pay for Zara's gambling habits. And all of this, without telling me. I couldn't breathe. I felt my legs weaken as I sank to the floor. How could they do this to me? How could they betray me like this, after everything I had done for them? I was the one paying for everything, while they had been taking my money and using it to cover up Zara's mistakes. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I couldn't stay in a place where I was nothing more than a tool to be used. I waited for them to return. When they did, they found me sitting in the living room, the documents spread out in front of me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with anger. "What is this loan? What is this eviction notice? Why is my money gone? Why is everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed, gone?" Zara's face was the first to turn red. She opened her mouth to speak, but it was my mom who answered. "It's none of your business, Aurora," she said, her voice hard, no trace of remorse in her tone. "You've been living here for free, taking advantage of us. You think your money is yours? It's mine. I used it to help Zara. She needed it." "You used my money," I spat, standing up now, my voice shaking with rage. "You took everything I had, and you didn't even think to tell me. You've been stealing from me. You've been using me. And I'm done." Zara stood up, looking at me with that familiar, smug smile. "You think you're the only one with problems, Aurora. You think you're the only one who's had a hard time? We needed that money. I was struggling. Mom was just helping me out. You're selfish if you can't see that." "Selfish?" My voice cracked as I felt the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. You think I'm selfish? You've been living off of me, using my money to pay off your debts, and you have the nerve to call me selfish? You're a parasite, Zara. You always have been. Zara's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. You don't understand, Aurora. You never will. It's always been about you and what you think is fair. But sometimes, you have to do what's necessary to survive. Survive? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You've been using me to survive, and now it's all come to this. The silence in the room was deafening. My mom didn't say a word, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She knew. She knew what they had done, and she knew how much it had hurt me, but instead of apologizing, she chose to ignore it. You can leave now, Aurora, my mom said coldly. We don't need you here anymore. We've taken care of everything, and you're not welcome anymore. I felt the last of my hope shatter in that moment. My own mother was turning her back on me. She was siding with Zara, with her debts, with her lies, and I was the one left standing alone, holding the pieces of my broken heart. Without another word, I walked out of the house. This time, I wasn't coming back. They had taken everything from me, but they had also given me the one thing I needed, the freedom to walk away. And this time, I would make sure that I never let them take anything from me again. The air felt thick as I stood in the doorway of the house, staring at the familiar walls that once felt like home, the same walls that had witnessed my sacrifices, my efforts, my love. But now, they only echoed the hollow betrayal that I had experienced at the hands of the people who were supposed to care for me. My heart was heavy with the decision I knew I had to make, but it wasn't just about walking away. It was about making sure that this time, I was choosing myself over them. I had to face them. I had to confront my mom and Zara, look them in the eyes, and make it clear that I was done. Done with the manipulation, the deceit, and the betrayal. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. But I couldn't leave without making them understand the full extent of what they had taken from me. The moment they walked through the door, I knew it was time. The familiar tension in my chest tightened, but I forced myself to stand tall. This wasn't going to be easy. I had been running from the truth for far too long, and now I had to face it head on. Mom, Zara, I said, my voice steady but firm. We need to talk. Zara looked up from her phone, a dismissive look on her face, while my mom stood frozen, a look of surprise flashing across her features. Neither of them had expected me to confront them. They probably thought I would just leave quietly, without saying a word, but I wasn't that person anymore. What is it, Aurora? My mom asked, her tone icy, as though she already knew where this was going. I've had enough, I said, walking further into the room, my eyes meeting my mom's. I'm done supporting you. I'm done being used by you both. Everything I've worked for, everything I've given, has been taken from me, and I'm not going to let it continue. Zara scoffed, her eyes narrowing. You're acting like you're the only one who's been struggling. Mom and I— No, I interrupted, cutting her off. You don't get to turn this around on me. You've been taking from me for months, using my money, my hard work, to cover your debts, your mistakes. You think I don't know about the loan, the eviction notice? The credit card charges? Both of them flinched, but neither of them spoke. They knew I was right, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in my mom's eyes, but it was too late. They had crossed the line. You used my money to cover your debts, Zara. You used me as your personal piggy bank, I continued, my voice shaking with anger. And you, Mom, you stood by and let it happen. You took everything I had saved up. You drained my accounts. I worked my ass off to keep this house running, to support both of us, and you turned around and used that money to fix Zara's messes. My mom finally spoke, her voice quiet but sharp. You're being dramatic. We needed help. You have a good job. You can afford to help your family. I shook my head, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. No, that's not how this works. You don't get to use me just because I have a steady job. You don't get to take my money and act like nothing's wrong. Zara leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defiantly. So what? You're just going to cut us off. Just like that? You think we don't need you? You don't need me. You need my money. That's all it's ever been, I snapped. You've never cared about me, Zara. You've always been the favorite, always been the one Mom relied on, even when you were causing all the problems. And I let it happen because I thought you were my family. But you've used me, and I'm done. My mom stood up, her face flushing with anger. How dare you talk to us like that? After everything we've done for you, you turn around and accuse us of using you. Everything you've done for me? I repeated, my voice rising. You've taken from me. You've never supported me the way I've supported you. You've never given me anything but criticism. I've done everything to take care of both of you, and this is how you repay me? The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of my words, the truth that hung in the air between us. They both looked at me like I was a stranger, like they didn't recognize the person standing in front of them. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had let them walk all over me for years, but not anymore. I've been paying for this house, paying the bills, paying for everything, I continued, my voice steady now, more confident. I'm the one who kept everything together after Dad died, and this is how you treat me. I'm not your punching bag. I'm not your ATM. And I'm not going to let you use me anymore. Zara opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. No, Zara. Don't even try to justify it. You've used me your whole life, and I'm done being your fallback. You want to live here? You want to use my money. You're going to have to find another way. Mom's face twisted with rage. You can't do this. You can't just walk away from your family. I'm your mother. I'm not walking away from you. I'm walking away from being used, I said, my voice finally breaking. You've treated me like I don't matter, like I'm just here to serve you both. I've been carrying everything for too long, and it's not fair anymore. I'm done. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe for them to beg me to stay, to apologize, to admit that they were wrong. But there was none of that. There was no remorse, no apology, no understanding. As I reached for the door handle, I heard my mom's voice call out to me, cold and sharp. You can't just leave. You owe us. I stopped, my hand on the door. For a moment, I considered going back. I considered explaining one more time, maybe making them understand. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't change. They had never changed. I don't owe you anything, I said, my voice quiet now but resolute. You've taken everything from me, and now I'm taking it all back. I stepped out the door, leaving them behind. I could hear them shouting after me, but I didn't stop. I had finally reached the point where I realized that no matter what they said or did, I would never be able to make them love me the way I needed. They would never be the family I wanted them to be. But I was okay with that now. Because for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. I was done giving, done sacrificing, and I was never going back. As I drove away, the weight that had been on my shoulders for so long finally began to lift. The freedom I had longed for was finally mine. I was free of them, free of the ties that had kept me bound for so long, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that freedom from me again. It's been a few months since I walked away from my family. At first, I felt the familiar sting of guilt, that constant voice in my head telling me I should have tried harder, that I should have stayed and fought for their love, their approval. But the more time passed, the more I realized something. The only person I was truly fighting for was myself. And that's exactly who I needed to prioritize. Leaving felt like cutting off a limb at first, painful, raw, and uncertain. But with each passing day, the weight lifted. I had my own space, my own life, and a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. I moved into the company housing, which turned out to be a far better fit than I ever could have imagined. The apartment was spacious, clean, and, most importantly, quiet. It was mine, no one else's. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about anyone else's problems or needs. I could focus on me. I could focus on building my life the way I wanted it. I spent hours unpacking, arranging my things just the way I liked them. I decorated with an eye for comfort and style, turning the space into a reflection of myself. It felt like I was finally allowed to breathe. Work, too, became something I started to enjoy again. The pressure of supporting my mom and Zara was gone. and I could fully devote myself to my career. I threw myself into projects with renewed enthusiasm, and it didn't go unnoticed. My manager praised my work more than ever, and within 2 months, I was promoted. The recognition was validating, but it wasn't the promotion that meant the most to me. It was the realization that I had made it on my own, without relying on anyone who had taken me for granted. As I thrived in my career, I also made new friends. I surrounded myself with people who respected me, who saw me for who I was, and not for what I could give them. It was refreshing to have relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than on obligation or manipulation. I started to feel like I could finally be myself, no longer weighed down by the constant need to prove myself to people who would never appreciate me. I also took the time to focus on my own happiness. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for when I was constantly taking care of everyone else. I rediscovered a love for creativity, for expression, for something that was just for me. My weekends were no longer filled with household chores or doing things to please others. Instead, I spent time exploring new places, taking photos, and truly enjoying my freedom. A few weeks ago, I even took a solo trip to the mountains. It was a getaway I had dreamed of for years, but it was always something that was pushed aside for the sake of someone else's needs. The hike was challenging, but the view from the summit was worth every bit of effort. Standing there, looking out over the world, I felt something I had never felt before: complete contentment. When I returned from that trip, I realized just how far I had come. The person who had once been drowning in guilt and obligation was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who understood that self-care wasn't selfish, and who had the courage to put herself first. I had learned to let go of the toxic ties that had kept me bound, and in doing so, I had found a peace I had longed for my entire life. As for my family, I don't know what the future holds. I haven't spoken to them since that day I walked out, and I don't know if I ever will. Part of me still feels the loss of the family I always wanted, but another part of me knows that I am better off without their constant weight on my shoulders. I am finally free from their demands, their expectations, and their manipulation. And while the pain of their betrayal will never fully go away, I have learned to live without their approval. I've learned to trust myself and my own judgment, and that is the greatest gift of all. In the end, walking away wasn't just about cutting ties with my family. It was about choosing myself. And in doing so, I found the strength and freedom to build a life that was mine and mine alone. I don't need anyone's validation to feel whole. I have everything I need within myself, and for the first time in a long time, I am truly happy. Story 2. Have you ever had the impression that your own family didn't see you? Like, you're bound to stay in the background no matter how hard you try. As Emma gazed at her childhood bedroom's dilapidated ceiling, she asked herself. For as long as she could remember, she had been aware that she was the second choice in her family. She was only the background to her brother Michael's genius. He was the spotlight, the golden kid. Her parents appeared to revolve around Michael from the time he took his first steps. They said that he was gifted, as though Emma's own achievements were unremarkable by contrast. Emma's hobbies were written off as short-lived triumphs, whereas Michael's skills were fostered and honored. Their parents strained the family finances to buy Michael top-notch equipment and put him in pricey voice lessons when he showed an interest in singing. Emma, meanwhile, received the same worn-out excuse and a sorry look when she quietly asked to enroll in an art class. Sweetheart, perhaps next semester. The budget is now being used for Michael's lessons. There was no denying the difference in focus, but it was slight enough to be considered normal. Like a repeating hymn, their mother's exclamations of Michael's potential filled the home. Michael has a knack for voice. Anybody who will listen would hear her gush. He will do something remarkable. Early on, Emma learnt to anticipate a small amount of recognition while she sat silently in the corner with her sketchbook. Michael's most recent accomplishments, such as winning a ribbon at a singing competition, playing the lead in the school play, or receiving positive comments from his instructors, were the topic of conversation at dinner. After a brief acknowledgement of Emma's accomplishments, such as a flawless report card or an intricate artwork, the focus returned to her brother. Favoritism peaked at the dinner table when Michael was in his final year of high school. Their father's statement one evening simultaneously shattered Emma's optimism and brightened Michael's face. With pride, he replied, "We've been saving up." "We're sending you to Preston College, Michael. You may stay in an apartment close to the campus, and it's one of the greatest institutions in the state." With a voice full of enthusiasm, their mother said, "No rent, of course. We want you to concentrate on your education." As the realization struck in, Emma sat calmly, moving her piece about her plate. There wouldn't be much left for her if her parents were devoting all of their money to Michael's schooling and living costs. She was lying in bed that night, gazing up at the ceiling. Emma experienced the pain of being ignored, but rather of allowing the bitterness to control her. She felt a quiet resolve ignite within of her. She would forge her own route if her family didn't make investments in her future. Emma made her case the next morning when she entered her grandparents' antique store. "I have to put money aside for college," she stated firmly. After examining her for a while, her grandfather nodded. "All right," he responded, his face lighting up with pride. "You've been hired." In the Miller home, Michael's packing day for Preston College was a momentous occasion. Their parents bustled around, making last-minute arrangements as suitcases lined a corridor. As their mother gave him a set of keys to the family's apartment close to university, Michael was beaming and soaking up the attention. With satisfaction in her voice, she continued, "This will give you the space to focus on your studies." Emma watched the action unfold from the background. There were no sincere farewells or assurances of plans for the future for her. She was secretly aware that her parents considered Michael's achievement to be the success of the entire family. Whatever she accomplished would just be a thought. Emma lay in bed that night and gazed up at the ceiling, the burden of her situation bearing down on her. Her parents had made it apparent that they would not be able to support her aspirations. For the first time, however, she felt determined rather than defeated. She would assist herself if they refused to aid her. The following morning, she entered the welcoming antique store owned by her grandparents, which had a fragrance of old wood and history. As she walked up to her grandfather, a perceptive guy who had a talent for recognizing resolve, he arched an eyebrow. She started studying her voice. "How can I save money for college? I don't want to be dependent on my parents. Are you able to assist me?" He took a time to examine her, while leaning back in his chair. With a little smirk pulling at his lips, he added, "I could just give you the money. But if you earned it, I believe it would mean more. After school, would you mind working here?" Emma's heart leaped. "I would adore doing so." From that day on. After school, Emma's routine entirely altered as her pals went to practice or hang out at the mall. She immediately made her way to the antique shop. She accepted the task even though it wasn't glamorous. She gained knowledge on how to deal with clients, catalog products, and even determine the worth of antiques. Her grandparents were tolerant educators who told tales of the riches that occupied the store. Her favorite times were when her grandma would bring her tea and sit with her while telling her stories about an antique grandfather clock or the background of a certain piece of Chinese pottery. In addition to learning about the antiques, Emma also absorbed the life lessons that were concealed inside their tales. Emma had never had such a feeling of pride in her work, even with the hard hours and the occasional setback. She demonstrated to herself that she didn't require others to provide her opportunities by making her own money. Her future felt, for the first time, like something she could control. It was evident how her parents responded to her newfound independence. They were almost relieved when Emma explained how she intended to use her work at the antique store to save money for education. "That's fantastic, my dear." Her mother waved her hand as she spoke. "It's admirable that you're taking charge." Their response validated Emma's long-held suspicions. They didn't intend to give her financial support. Their satisfaction that Emma was taking care of herself outweighed any remorse they could have had about investing all of their money in Michael. After school, years of arduous labor went by swiftly. Emma put money away from every paycheck with a single goal in mind: university. Her grandparents, who frequently gave her little bonuses when she didn't expect them, quietly took satisfaction in her change. As they were closing up shop one evening, Emma's grandfather told her, "You're doing something special, Emma. You're creating your own life." Emma grinned to herself that evening as she secured the door and switched out the store lights. She wasn't only putting money aside for education, she was gaining independence, resilience, and responsibility. Emma realized she was creating something far more significant than Michael, who was enjoying the radiance of his parents' steadfast love. Her own future, without the conditions of others. Emma felt as though she had entered another universe when she first arrived on the Riverside State College campus. She was excited but cautiously by the busy kids, the tall buildings, and the prospect of new possibilities. She was the only one who got here. Her perseverance was demonstrated by every money she saved and every late shift she did at the antique store. By the time she announced her acceptance, her parents had hardly spoken. "That's fantastic, my dear," her mother said absently. "We're quite pleased with you." Emma, however, had discovered that her words were not always reliable. She was proud of herself. Emma found a groove quite soon. She worked a part-time job at a nearby cafe in the afternoons, attended lectures in the mornings, and studied late into the night in her tiny shared dorm room. Although working in the cafe was demanding, the pay was sufficient to pay for her tuition and living expenses. She took the bus everywhere, packed lunches, and avoided going out on the town. As she carefully managed her budget, it was difficult to overlook the sharp contrast between her life and Michael's. Michael displayed an easygoing and luxurious lifestyle on his Instagram account. He shared pictures from weekend vacations, nights out with pals, and Preston's lovely campus. His lifestyle was clearly influenced by their parents. They paid him monthly money for necessities, and the apartment they had given him was completely furnished. Emma no longer resented Michael's advantages. Although she had moved over it, she still harbored a secret pain and wished her parents had even a small portion of the same pride in her as they had in him. At Michael's graduation, that pain came back with a vengeance. For their son's special day, the Millers went all out. With live music, catered food, and a guest list that appeared to encompass half the town, the mansion was turned into a celebratory space. While Michael reveled in his parents' admiration, Emma assisted in the background by putting up the tables and organizing the canapes. The audience erupted in shouts when Paul and his radiant fiancée Sarah arrived at the reception hand in hand. "Everyone," said Michael, lifting his glass, "I have some exciting news with Sarah. We have gotten engaged." From the corner, Emma watched as their parents embraced them both and started crying with happiness. It seemed as though the entire evening was planned to emphasize Michael's accomplishments and contentment. She questioned whether anyone was even aware of her presence. Her own graduate. It couldn't have been more different 3 years later. Despite Emma's flawless 4.0 GPA, there were no lavish celebrations or an excessively long guest list. Her parents suggested having a quiet supper at home instead of even offering to go to the wedding. Emma's grandparents were the only visitors for the simple dinner, which she prepared herself. "You have our utmost admiration, dear." As she reached across the table to grasp her hand, her grandma whispered affectionately, "Working part-time while earning high honors upon graduation. It's no little accomplishment." Emma grinned. The remainder of the evening served as a bitter reminder of her position within the family, despite her gratitude for their assistance. After a few minutes, the dinner's emphasis changed when her mother's phone rang with a message from Michael. According to Michael, the company is growing. Her mother raved about 2 new places. "Isn't that incredible?" Her dad grinned proudly. Greatness has always been in the boy's destiny. She had just accomplished something extraordinary, but Emma didn't bother to mention it. She just took a drink of her water and let the discussion to pass. She was used to being ignored by now. Michael's wedding was an extravagant event, much more so than his graduation. Their parents devoted the following year to organizing the celebration, taking out a sizable loan to make sure everything went according to plan. They didn't cut any corners. The setting was opulent, the flowers were beautiful, and the catering was excellent. In the meantime, Emma manages to make ends meet while working a part-time job and finishing her last year of college. Sarah demanded that Emma be a bridesmaid, a role Emma had to pay for herself, even though she hadn't been invited to be in the wedding party. On the day of the wedding, Emma wore a pastel dress and stood on the sidelines, seeing her parents dance with the newlyweds, beaming with joy. This reminded her of her private graduation supper. She couldn't stop thinking. Rather than feeling better, however, Emma had a renewed sense of clarity. She understood that she didn't require their affirmation or approval. While her parents threw all of their resources and energy into Michael, she would continue to go forward since she had come this far on her own. Emma had developed a sense of independence and the will to make her life genuinely her own, which were considerably more valuable. Emma made the decision that her victories, no matter how subtly attained, would always be hers to treasure as she stood there in the shadow of her brother's lavish celebration. Emma recognized a chance to gain some independence after Michael and Sarah moved to Connecticut to start a new chapter in their lives. The college flat where Michael had resided was now vacant. Although it wasn't ostentatious and was conveniently close to her university, Emma saw it as a symbol of independence and a place that might finally be her own. She brought up the topic one evening when her folks were watching TV. "Father, Mother, would it be acceptable if I moved into Michael's flat now that it's empty? It would make my last year much simpler because it's so near to campus." Her mother and father looked at each other, and then she answered, "You can move in, honey, but you'll have to pay the rent." Emma blinked, surprised. Rent? During college, Michael was able to live there for free. That was not the same. With an uneasy shift, her father spoke. "Compared to the wedding debt, we were in a better financial situation. We just cannot afford to provide you a free stay." Emma didn't protest, even if the comments hurt. She had long since discovered that she couldn't count on her parents to be fair. "All right," she responded at last. "I'll cover the rent." She moved into the flat that weekend. There were still faint shapes of Michael on the walls, where posters had been, and his cologne's lingering smell. Emma, however, was eager to claim it as her own. She balanced her rigorous academic schedule with extra work at the cafe, sometimes staying till closing to make sure she could pay the rent. She persisted despite the long days and the fact that sleep had become a luxury. By the time Emma received her degree, her efforts had paid off. In addition to maintaining a flawless GPA, she had been offered a position at one of the city's most prominent businesses, Anderson and Mitchell. The starting pay was more than she had anticipated. She also experienced the weight of her sacrifices for the first time. She had done it all by herself. Graduation day arrived and passed with little recognition from her parents. There was only a peaceful meal at home, no family get-together or celebration. Her grandparents showered her with love and joy as they celebrated her accomplishment. However, her parents continued to focus on other things. According to Michael, the infant is beginning to walk. Her mother sat at the table and used her phone to show everyone a video. Emma just grinned and moved on. She had given up hoping for more. Emma received a call from her mother 3 days after starting her new work. "Hello, my love." Her mother started off in an oddly upbeat tone. "I spoke with your dad, and we agreed that since you're now earning so much money, you should start paying double rent." Emma froze and gripped the phone. "Rent twice? Why?" Her mother went on to say, "We could really use the extra income because we have more expenses now, with the wedding loan and everything." Emma had a wave of incredulity. "For an apartment where Michael remained for free for years, you want me to pay twice as much rent? I am also your daughter." Her father interrupted. "That was a different time. Back then, we weren't under these financial strains. Emma, you can afford it. You should be glad to assist." After years of being treated as an afterthought, her parents' nonchalant entitlement left her dumbfounded. At last, Emma had drawn a line. "All right," she answered firmly. "That night, I'll give it some thought." Emma launched her laptop and began looking through real estate listings. She was not going to let her parents to squeeze her for every dime. Near her new office, she discovered a contemporary one-bedroom apartment. The idea of living away from her family's incessant demands felt like a breath of fresh air, and the rent was fair. Her mother called once more the next month as the rent deadline drew near. "Emma, keep in mind that this Friday is when we expect the updated amount." Emma grinned to herself. "I've actually moved out, Mom. You have the flat to yourself now." On the other end of the telephone, there was a startled quiet. "What?" "You can't simply walk away. I've done so already." Calmly, Emma said. "Do you wish to double the rent? And I've made the decision to live somewhere I genuinely like with that money. I wish you luck in finding someone else to shoulder your financial burden." Emma didn't remain on the line long enough to hear her mother's reaction, but she stammered in shock. In her life, for the first time, she felt liberated. Emma had a room that was completely hers for the first time in her new apartment, which was compact but comfortable. No remorse, no deceit, no letting her brother take center stage. She was drinking a cup of coffee she had made especially for herself while she sat on her new couch. Emma grinned. No one could take away her freedom since she had earned every bit of it. When the call arrived, Emma was in the middle of her second year at Anderson and Mitchell. There was strain in her mother's voice on the other line. "We must discuss your brother, Emma. Problems have arisen." As it happened, trouble was an understatement. Michael was destitute and jobless after his firm crashed catastrophically. The consequences had been disastrous: growing debt, the loss of their house, and a tumultuous argument with Sarah's parents. Her mother stated that he was returning home. Emma's stomach dropped when she realized what was about to happen with Sarah and the baby. "I take it they're not going to move into my apartment." "Well," her mother said in a suddenly guarded tone, "the apartment is larger and more appropriate for a family. Emma, you are only one person. It only makes sense. How about me? I call this place home. Rent is something I pay." The voice of her father interrupted. "It's only transitory. Emma, your sibling has experienced a great deal. I'm sure you'll understand." It didn't matter that Emma didn't. A week later, Michael, Sarah, and their wailing infant son Tommy showed up with a ton of stuff. The transfer was overseen by their mother, who gave commands like a drill sergeant. "Get out of your room, Emma. The infant need a nursery." Emma stopped. "Where should I go to sleep?" Infuriatingly casual was her mother's reply. Naturally, the sofa. It's quite cozy. Years of being rejected prevented her from arguing and demanding justice. Rather, she shifted her things into the small living room and stacked boxes beside the couch that served as her temporary bed. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. Sulking and hooked to his phone, Michael would spend his days looking through job advertisements that he had no intention of applying for. Sarah alternated between complaining explicitly about the apartment's modest size and making passive-aggressive remarks. The confusion was exacerbated by the baby's constant crying. Emma returned home to a noisy and disorganized apartment after a hard day at her demanding job. Her groceries ran out more quickly than she could restock them, and the sink was always full with dirty dishes. She made an effort to control her anger, but one evening, it erupted when she came home to see Sarah having Tommy and another baby around for a play date. The floor was covered in toys, and baby food was all over the place. Emma drew Michael away. "This isn't functioning. You're not making any contributions. And everything here is paid for by me. At least you could lend a hand." Michael gave her a look as though she had made a ridiculous suggestion. "Emma, I'm going through a difficult period. Right now, I don't need the stress." It was astounding how entitled he sounded. "Feeling stressed?" Emma lost her temper. "Do you know what I have to deal with on a daily basis? While you're sleeping on a couch, I'm working full-time and paying my rent." "Enough," he broke off. "This is only a temporary situation. Give it up being such a huge deal." Emma knew it was useless, so she bit back her answer. Since childhood, the dynamic had been unchanged. She was supposed to endure in silence, and Michael was the star. 2 weeks later, she reached her breaking point. Emma heard Michael and Sarah conversing in the kitchen late one evening as she was working on a project for her job. They were quiet, but there was no mistaking the smugness in their words. "Is it not unbelievable?" Sarah laughed. "I heard from your mother. They are returning to us half of Emma's rent. In a sense, we are living here for nothing." Michael laughed. "Naturally, our parents are aware of our current need for assistance. Emma is quite wealthy. She can sustain us for some time." Emma felt her heart thumping in her chest. Thus, this was the reality. The residence wasn't merely being maintained by her hard-earned money. It was being used to finance the freeloading lifestyle of Michael and Sarah. That night, any residual regret she had about leaving vanished. Emma launched her laptop and completed her apartment search. She located a one-bedroom apartment near her workplace. Cost-effective and, most all, devoid of family strife. She paid the money and signed the lease the next morning. The process of leaving was a covert one. She left furnishings and anything connected to her family's manipulation behind and packed her necessities into a few bags. She left a note on the counter and crept away at daybreak. Later that day, Emma left her mother's call on voicemail. It was an irate message, as was to be expected. "How could you just walk out, Emma? How is your brother doing? We need the money from your rent." Emma didn't answer. Rather, she slumped back on the couch in her new apartment and blocked her parents' calls. It was wonderful quiet. Don't be a whiner. No quarreling couple. No requests laced with guilt. After a few weeks, life found a calm rhythm. Emma thrived in her work and relished the simplicity of having a place all to herself as she embraced her freedom. Her grandma then phoned one day to provide an update. Sarah and Michael remain at the previous flat. Her voice was a mixture of pity and frustration as she spoke. All of the bills are now being paid by your parents. Michael hasn't even looked for work. Emma let out a sigh. Her determination simply became stronger. Grandma, that's their decision. I've had enough of it. Emma felt liberated for the first time in her life, emotionally as well as physically. She was no longer bound by her family's cycle, but they could carry on. She wasn't looking back because she had paved her own way. For the first time in years, Emma found a place to call home in her new apartment. She was at ease. No whining infant, no spoiled siblings, and no incessant requests. She enjoyed the opportunity to design a house that reflected her as she carefully outfitted the room, choosing every piece of furniture herself. It felt luxurious, even to get home to a spotless kitchen, or to see her groceries unopened. But her parents weren't quite happy with her newfound freedom. At first, she received frequent calls from her mother, each one more demanding than the last. Emma, you cannot simply cut us off in this manner. Michael requires assistance. Emma did not recoil. She had become adept at defending her limits. No, mother, I've done enough. You'll figure it out. After weeks of guilt-tripping, voicemails blocked their numbers after she hung up. Instead, her grandparents provided the updates. Sarah and Michael were still residing in the flat, completely reliant on her parents, who were also having financial difficulties. One day, her grandfather shook his head and remarked, "Your folks are enabling him. However, you made the proper decision to leave. You don't have to bear it." Emma put a lot of effort into her job, and it paid off. She gained the respect of her colleagues, a promotion, and a sizable salary in just 2 years. To further cement the future she was creating for herself, she even began attending nighttime MBA programs. Emma looked back with relief rather than resentment. Although it had been challenging, severing her relationship with her dysfunctional family was the finest choice she had ever taken. She was prioritizing herself for the first time, and the effects were evident: tranquility, development, and prosperity. She had never been more proud of the person she had become, and now her life was truly her own. Story 3. By the time she was 30, Sophia, a manager at Preston and Associates, had created the life she had always imagined. She was renowned for her keen intuition, leadership skills, and unmatched work ethic. 10 years of hard work paid off at her 19th floor corner office, with a broad view of the busy city below. She reached this point of achievement as a result of every promotion, late night at work, and missed vacation. However, Sophia frequently pondered that success had its own price. Lila and Chloe, her younger sisters, had made different decisions. Lila was a 25-year-old mother of 2 children. Playdates and PTA meetings occupied her days. With a baby and a 3-year-old daughter, Chloe, 28, managed to balance family meals and diaper changes with surprisingly ease. Sophia observed their lives from a distance, following significant events via social media posts and group discussions. First words, first steps. Sophia felt proud of what she had done, but she was not involved in birthday celebrations. There was a persistent discomfort. She made her job choice, but she frequently questioned whether she had lost something intangible in the process. She frequently felt like the odd one out during family get-togethers, the one who didn't quite fit in. Her family did not purposefully exclude her. Although they were always proud of her achievements, the small disparity between their lives felt like an imperceptible barrier. Sophia had nothing to add to her sisters' stories about teething babies or restless nights. She longed for their friendship and the experiences they shared that she was excluded from. Sophia's phone buzzed one clear Tuesday morning while she was going through a pile of reports at her desk. When name appeared on the screen, Sophia responded with her typical briskness. "Ash, hello." She heard Lila's chirpy voice. "Have a moment?" Sophia put down her pen for you and grinned. "Always. What is going on?" Before long, the conversation shifted to their mother's impending 58th birthday. Chloe and Lila had been discussing how to make it unique. Sophia eagerly listened as the idea of being involved in the planning made her heart sing. "We're keeping it simple this year," Lila said. "Just a family gathering at home. But we need everyone to chip in and take some time off to make it work." "Say no more," Sophia replied without hesitation. I'll transfer my share today and block off my calendar. It'll be great to celebrate together," as she hung up the call. Sophia felt a rare sense of excitement for once. She wouldn't just be the distant sister, the one too busy with work to be present. This time she hoped things would be different. The dining room of Sophia's parents' home buzzed with the familiar chaos of a family gathering. Plates clinked as her mother fussed over serving everyone's favorite dishes. Her father told the same old jokes that still earned polite laughter, and her sisters chatted animatedly about their latest parenting escapades. Sophia sat at the table, quietly, enjoying the moment. It had been too long since she'd been surrounded by her family like this. As the evening fell, Lila tapped her glass with a spoon, begging for attention. "All right, everyone, listen up. We've got an announcement." Sophia's interest heightened as the room quiet. Layla with a huge smile on her face and glanced at Chloe, who gave her an encouraging gesture for Mom's 58th. "We've completed the plans," Layla started. "We're spending a week at Pine Ridge Resort." Excited discussion arose. Their dad instantly started reminiscing about his skiing days. Chloe began discussing clothes for the kids, and their mom thrilled at the possibility of a winter holiday. Sophia felt herself smiling too, imagining a week of togetherness, fun, and memories. "This is perfect," Sophia said. "My schedule is already blocked. I'm eager." For a brief moment, Lila's grin wavered, and Sophia saw Chloe avert her eyes. There was a strange feeling. Layla, however, paused and then pushed forward. Her voice was too informal. "We were actually hoping you could do us a great favor, Ash." Sophia scowled a little. "What sort of favor?" "Watching children, as though it were the most natural thing in the world," Chloe added her voice. "The kids adore you and Sophia, and you're so excellent with them. While we're at the resort, it will only last for a week. I take it you don't mind?" The word struck Sophia in the stomach. She looked to her sisters in the hopes that someone would chuckle and call it a joke. However, there was simply the anticipation of her approval on their faces. No humor. "Hold on." Sophia spoke slowly while attempting to maintain a steady tone. "While you all celebrate at the resort, do you want me to stay behind and monitor all 5 children?" Layla waved a dismissive hand and said, "Come on, Ash. It's not really important. You get along well with them. The point isn't that." Sophia's chest constricted as she answered, "I also want to rejoice. Mom's birthday is today." Chloe let out a sigh and looked at Layla. "Sophia, in any case, you'll be bored there. The kids would have more fun with you, and you're not a big skier." "Are you bored?" Sophia was hearing things that she found hard to accept. "So you guys made this decision without consulting me at all? You don't really need a vacation from your family," Layla replied, her voice becoming patronizing. "You don't have a spouse or children." "Yes, we do. This is our opportunity to unwind." The word struck like a slap, and Sophia felt the burden of 10 years of sacrifice pressing down on her as memories of missing holidays to support her parents raced through her head. Sending money home to assist her sisters while providing on-demand babysitting, she had always been dependable, accountable, unselfish, and had never demanded anything in return. "My time doesn't count because I don't have children?" Sophia inquired, her voice trembling with suppressed passion. Chloe rolled her eyes and murmured, "Don't be dramatic. All of us are contributing. This is only her portion." She acted as though she had an obligation to do this. Sophia's voice became stronger as she added, "I've always helped. However, this isn't helpful. You are all determining my function here." Uncomfortably, the table became silent. The tension was released as her mother cleared her throat. "They're only requesting a favor, honey. Families remain united." Sophia's annoyance was evident as she looked into her mother's eyes. "Family members also respect one another. They encompass one another. You didn't even consider asking me if I was comfortable with this." Clearly annoyed, Layla crossed her arms. "Why do you think this is so important? It's only a week. You've previously always said yes." After hearing those words, Sophia froze. She had always been expected to answer yes. Her sacrifices are often taken for granted. Something changed within her. To her surprise, she responded firmly, "No, I'm not going to do it." Accusations and protests broke out in the room. For the first time, however, Sophia had already made up her mind. As she sat there, she refused to let them determine her position. They blended their voices into a clamor of guilt-tripping and incredulity. Sophia came to a significant realization. This journey wasn't the only one. It was about her life being underappreciated and being ignored for years. She was drawing the line this time. Sophia gazed at her phone while she sat on the couch. She relived the family meal in her head, remembering their condescending demeanor and entitled demands, each word piercing her more deeply. She had prioritized everyone else before herself for years, going above and beyond to make room for everyone. However, something within her resisted giving in this time. Her laptop opened. She hovered her fingers over the keyboard. It's okay if they didn't want her to join in the celebration at the resort. For herself, she would do something else. In an hour. Sophia had purchased a first-class plane ticket, a beachfront hotel, a week-long trip to Florida, and every possible bit of freedom she could want. She was going to find her own happiness with the same funds and time she had allocated for the resort vacation. Sophia gave her place a final inspection the morning before she left. Everything was in its proper place. There was nothing in the refrigerator. The windows were locked. She consciously decided to leave her phone off for the next week and put it in her bag. No calls, no messages, no guilt. Sophia stepped out of the airport into the warm Florida breeze. Her mood is already improving due to the salty air. Her hotel was an ideal setting, a comfortable room with a view of the endless blue ocean from the balcony. She kicked off her shoes and walked barefoot along the shoreline that first afternoon. Waves lapped at her feet, and the cool sand squeezed between her toes. Her frazzled mind was calmed by their rhythmic crush. Sophia felt at peace for the first time in years. In Florida, every day was like a dream. As the sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, she began her mornings with coffee on the balcony. The afternoons were spent reading for pleasure, dining quietly at outdoor cafes, and perusing the charming beachside stores. She hadn't given herself that luxury in years. One evening, Sophia was sitting on the beach with a diary she had purchased from a nearby store as the sun began to set. She started writing about herself, her goals, her wants, and the person she wanted to be outside of everyone else's expectations, rather than about her job or her family's responsibilities. The burden she had borne for so long appeared to lighten with every day. Sophia wasn't someone's sister for the first time, daughter, or trustworthy backup. It was liberating to be her own self. Anarchy was developing at home. Sophie and her family arrived at her flat on the morning of the resort excursion. Children and suitcases in tow. Anticipating that she would be prepared to assume her designated duty as the babysitter, they rang the doorbell. Rather, they encountered stillness. When Sophia didn't answer the phone, Layla was the first to call. Lila's voicemail began with the messages. Sophia? We're outside. Will you be at the door? The children are becoming agitated. Chloe followed. This isn't funny, Ash. Get out. We will arrive late for check-in. Soon it became apparent that Sophia was not at home. Panic swiftly replaced confusion. The message's tone changed around mid-morning. Daniel? Where are you, Sophia? You cannot just vanish in this manner. You are what we need. Anger replaced terror by the afternoon. You self-centered witch, Layla. How could you harm us like this? Are you aware of what you have destroyed? Chloe. You are the reason why Mom's birthday is going so badly. It's unbelievable that you would act so immaturely. She received a stern message from her mother, who also jumped in. I never imagined that you would prioritize yourself over your family. Sophia, I'm really disappointed in you. Sophia, meantime, was enjoying a fruity cocktail and tanning while relaxing on a lounge chair by the hotel pool. Her phone was still off and hidden in her backpack, out of the way of her newfound tranquility. For the first time, she didn't care what her family was saying, and she had no idea what they were saying. Sophia felt lighter than she had in years at the conclusion of the week. Her skin was shining from the Florida sun, but it was more than that. She had found the aspect of herself that she had not known was missing. The aspect that should be respected, loved, and most importantly, joyful. Her phone burst with missed calls, voicemails, and texts when she finally switched it on when she got home. She read the charges, guilt trips, and plain insults from her relatives as she scrolled through them. The messages didn't hurt as much as they used to. Rather, they confirmed what she already knew. They had never really considered her a person, merely someone they could depend on when it was convenient for them. Sophia exhaled deeply and set her phone on the counter. She refused to answer. Not now. She was more determined than ever. She had been the trustworthy one, the unselfish sister who never refused, for years. She could see plainly now, though. It wasn't selfish of her to choose herself. It was essential. She was unpacking her bag. Her thoughts returned to the sea. The crash of the waves hitting the beach. She was not going back to her previous self, because that week had been a turning point in her life. For the first time, Sophia was living her life as she saw fit. A few months later, Sophia had to drive to her parents' house to celebrate her mother's birthday. The consequences of her absence had been significant, and the resort getaway had long ago ended. Since their calls, texts, and Kurt had stopped, the family had seldom talked to her. Nevertheless, Sophia accepted her mother's invitation to a modest birthday party. At the very least, she thought it would be an opportunity to make amends. She brought a thoughtfully selected present with her as she entered the house. Her mother's scrapbook, which had handwritten notes from every important event throughout her life. Sophia had dedicated hours to it, in the hopes that it would serve as a reminder of her mother's importance, in spite of everything. It was quieter than normal in the living room. Her father had been watching television. The children were running about as Chloe and Layla spoke in the corner. The house echoed with their laughing. Despite the obvious tension, Sophia forced a grin as she welcomed everyone. Sophia made an effort to strike up a conversation as the evening went on, but it was obvious that her sisters were avoiding her. Her 2-year-old mother was aloof and only spoke to her when it was absolutely necessary. Sophia remained optimistic, though, believing that when it came time for the cake, things may be better. Sophia volunteered to assist in bringing out the dessert when the time came. The candles on the cake flickered faintly as she carried it gingerly into the dining room. As Sophia set it in front of her mother, everyone crowded around. "Mom, happy birthday." With a kind gesture, Sophia gave her the knife. "Make a wish." After a moment of staring at the cake, her mother turned to face Sophia. The room became silent. Unspoken remarks weighed heavily on the mood. "Is this how you're making up for leaving us?" Sharply, her mother remarked. The quiet was broken by her voice. Sophia was taken by surprise and froze. "What? I heard you," her mother went on, her voice becoming more stern. "We were caught off guard by you, ruined my trip for my B-Day, and now you believe that all will be resolved with a cake and a scrapbook?" Although the remarks hurt, Sophia made an effort to remain composed. "I didn't leave anyone behind, Mom. All I had to do was establish limits." "Limits?" Her mother cut in, raising her voice. "You're referring to selfishness. You've evolved." "Sophia, I didn't raise you like a daughter." As the charges mounted, Sophia's chest constricted. She looked around the room, but nobody defended her. Her sisters cast a downward glance. Their quiet says much. Abruptly, her mother snatched a handful of the cake. Anger distorted her face. "Are you curious about my opinion on your boundaries?" Sophia's mother smashed the cake in her face before she could respond. As icing trickled down Sophia's cheeks, cheers reverberated across the room. Despite the terrible humiliation, Sophia remained unflinching. Stunned but determined, she stood there. Shaking hands, they wiped away the icing. Sophia inhaled deeply as the room fell eerily silent. At last, she spoke in a forceful but composed tone. "Mom, you know what? You're correct. I've evolved," Sophia said, her eyes unwavering in spite of the tears that threatened to spill. "I have prioritized this family throughout my life. To support you all, I sacrificed nights out, vacations, and even my own mental health. For what purpose? To receive this kind of treatment?" Her mother parted her lips to speak. Sophia, however, raised a hand. "Let me finish, please. My answer has always been yes, always been the trustworthy one. Always been a reliable individual. However, it has never been sufficient. Once I made the decision for myself, the time I refused. You determined that I was the bad guy." The words were weighty and unforgiving as they lingered in the air. Sophia's voice grew softer as she glanced at her sisters. "I deserve respect, even if I love you all. I should not be viewed as merely someone you may employ when it suits you." Her mother's expression darkened. "It's not worth returning if you leave by that door." Despite the pain in her heart, Sophia acted without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to live my life as I see fit." Sophia then turned and moved in the direction of the entrance. Even when her mother yelled, she didn't turn around. Anger and resentment were evident in her voice. It felt terrible and liberating to hear the door close behind her. Sophia was standing on the porch outside. Her cheeks was reddened by the chilly night air. She inhaled deeply after wiping the last of the icing off her face. She felt lighter and more liberated than she had in years, despite the pain. As she made her way to her car, she had finally drawn a line and defended herself. Sophia was aware that everything will change at this moment. For the first time, she was treading the path on her own terms, even if it would not be easy. And that was worth everything she knew. The confrontation's aftermath was both anticipated and draining. Sophia's phone was constantly buzzing with family notifications. Their dissatisfaction now manifested itself in flimsy social media messages. Lila's post, "Family should always come first. Yet some individuals overlook this. I'm so fortunate to have people that genuinely get what it means." Chloe's update. "Thankful for family members that support them no matter what. There is no room for toxic individuals in our life. My kids learned to respect family from her mom's message, but I suppose not all of the teachings are retained. Tragic, Sophia." Her chest constricted as she read each one, and then she put her phone down. These remarks may have caused the old Sophia to lose sleep as she mentally prepared answers and considered if she was really at fault. However, it is no longer the case. The manipulation had been exposed, and she had no intention of turning back. Sophia turned her energies within rather than outward. She joined a book club at a nearby cafe, and on a calm Saturday morning, she went to her first meeting. It seemed weird at first, but freeing to sit with strangers, drink coffee, and talk about novels. Her weekend was free from outside demands for the first time in years. She also began organizing her next journey, which would be a springtime solo trip to Europe. She didn't schedule, consult anybody, or seek permission. It was her choice, her time, her money, and every action she made to start again. It was like dropping a burden she was unaware that she had been carrying. She finally made the time to go to the theater by herself, something she had always wanted to do. As she reflected on her voyage, she poured her thoughts into the pages of her journal during peaceful evenings. Even with her newfound calm, Sophia frequently wondered about her nieces and nephews. She missed their unadulterated delight, their wide-eyed wonder, and their laughing. They were the only member of her family whom she genuinely wanted to stay with. She hoped that as kids grew up, they would comprehend her choice. Perhaps they might even see the same trends and decide differently for themselves. The family group chat caught Sophia's attention one evening as she was browsing through her phone. For weeks it had lain dormant, an electronic memento of the connection she had formerly gone to such lengths to preserve. Her thumb lingered over the delete option as she gazed at it for a considerable amount of time. She touched it at last. The group was gone from her screen, leaving a blank area where the discussion had been. Sophia reclined, a feeling of closure keeping watch over her. Eliminating the conversation involved more than just getting rid of the messages. It represented her determination. She was not going to compromise her decision to uphold her dignity once more. For the first time, she had control over the future, even though it seemed unknown. In a silent but impactful confirmation of the life she was creating on her own terms, Sophia grinned to herself,